get started. Are you ready, Carsten?
Yep.
All right. So welcome to our member call, last one before the summer holidays on liberating structures. Let me hand it over to Carsten, joining us from the home office, not too far away from Lego headquarters in Denmark.
Yep. I hope you can see my screen. That was at least the hope. Before I dive into a lot, I would actually just like to start with this. So if I ask you in 25 minutes, probably, what made this a pretty good session or an awesome session, what are you going to answer? Then just put it in the chat, but do not send it just yet. I'll just say the magic word Felix, just for me to get an idea of what you hope to get out of this session. So hopefully we can make that happen. So what would make this an awesome session?
I like it, Carsten. Audience participation right up front.
Yeah, just me wanting to maybe make sure I actually deliver what was asked for and not just what I found interesting to talk about.
What you asked for, what they expected, what they want, what they really needed.
Exactly. So when you're ready, you can just click send. Felix, we go by protocol.
All right, and Rasmus Sheeran just joining. Feel free to just answer this question in the chat, and then Carsten can just pick it up from here.
Yep. Cool.
Carsten,
so this at least gives me some ideas. Some of this we will touch upon, some of it might not be covered, but let's talk about that at the end of the session. If you have questions along the way, right, just raise your hand or unmute or write it in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat throughout the session. So let's try to limit this being a one-way dialogue from me, but more, monologue, but more of a dialogue instead. My name is Carsten. If you haven't figured it out already, I'm an agile coach at the Lego Group. I also sometimes refer to myself as a janitor. What I do is I primarily go around in the background to sweep the corners to make sure that the teams are as productive as possible. I'm an ICF certified coach and lover of something called solution-focused coaching. And I use that together with liberating structures to facilitate both one-on-one coaching sessions, but also events with several hundred participants and everything in between. Right now, I'm sitting in something called Group Business Agility, where we support the entire Lego Group, so not just IT, but also product development and finance and you name it. So rather big playing field. And as a principle, we only do stuff that gives us energy and that we believe in. So that's actually quite nice. The topic of this session is liberating structures. And this model is a oversimplification in so many ways, but it's at least a good starting point to figure out what is liberating structures. If we have two axes, with this axis being that we have one that is in control of content, that means we have one that decides what are we looking at, what are we focusing on, what are we talking about, versus, of course, on the other end, we have many in control of content. And that being we do some kind of group work. And the other axis being we have one shaping action, so one deciding what are we doing, one shaping actions. And as some of you have probably already guessed, the other end is many shaping actions. So many different people deciding what are we doing, why are we doing it, what should we do next. Then what we're doing right now is a classic presentation. So I would put it somewhere down this corner. Right now, I'm deciding what we're looking at. I'm talking. I'm deciding what happens next. So maybe not the most interactive way of collaborating. If we have an open discussion, for instance, a free-form discussion, that would probably be somewhere around here. So we have many different people pitching in, but it's still with a theme. So it's still somebody saying we need to brainstorm around this, or we need to discuss this. So that puts it up in this quadrant. We can also have, for instance, status reports, where we have probably all of us giving a status report to a specific person. That would be down here. This is just to give some kind of an idea of it. Liberating structures in general, there are exceptions, or not all the time. There are some steps in some liberating structures that does not reside up here, but in general, liberating structures is up here, where we, through some might say clever ways of inviting people to participate, we can distribute the work and who talks to a quite big group of people with a minimum effort. And at the moment we have 33, I think, official liberating structures in this facilitation toolbox, and I can't remember, 4 or 5 in development. Some of them are quite awesome, even though they're in development. And all of these liberating structures, they can be found on the website liberatingstructures.com. And you can just take it and use it. You probably already know some of them, but maybe by another name. When we're then talking about liberating structures, this facilitation toolbox, it consists of 5 things, and all 5 things need to be there to get it off the ground. So the first one is, how do we arrange the space, the physical space, whether it's a virtual whiteboard or if it's an actual physical workshop room, then there is some setup. Maybe we need the chairs in circles between 7 and 9 chairs, or maybe we need groups of 3, or maybe we just need an open floor. All of this is described pretty well, so we know how to set up for this. When we are then in the session, we never force people to do anything, we invite them. So we make an invitation to participate. And this invitation is sometimes a bit abstract, and hopefully it helps people to reflect on what is it that we're going to do. So it's not, you need to solve X, Y, Z. It's more, how can we maybe make progress on this, or what would happen if we didn't do X, Y, Z, and so on. So when we prepare for our session with liberating structures, this is where we spend quite a lot of time to hopefully get some good invitations, because this will make or break a lot of our session. When we then made the invitation, we distribute the participation to the entire group. If we are doing 1, 2 for all, then everybody starts individually and in silence, for instance, to have everybody engaged from the get-go. So it's not a CEO or whatever that it kicks off and talks for half an hour, but we really want to get people talking as soon as possible. When we have distributed this participation, we do that also through the invitation. So once I'm done explaining what I want you to do is blah, blah, blah. In this way, we invite people in and we distribute the participation and giving it to them instead. Then we have some steps that we help the participants to navigate. So I never show up with a PowerPoint going through all the steps. I just give them the next step and the next step, so they do not need to think ahead. I will just keep telling them what is the next step. In this way, I do not need a PowerPoint or a big flip chart for what is going to happen. They just need to trust that I'm actually okay aware of what we are doing. And that has some pretty nice benefits, because we can then pivot and change the session as we see fit if some other topics than what we had expected pops up. Then we also configure groups. All of this has always some kind of groups in it. we are going to look at a structure called 1, 2 for all, where we just ask people to find somebody and pair up with, and then find another pair to pair up with. That's one way of configuring groups. Another way is maybe also just go to that specific station and then distribute in the room so there is somewhat an equal number. Quite a lot of different tactics or strategies exist, but every time you use liberating structure, there is some way of doing it that's actually pretty well described. When we then talk about liberating structure, it's more or less just a building block that we can use, and this building block then have some kind of input. So it has some kind of goal, some kind of thing we would like to get out of it, some room, of course, because we need to be somewhere, and some participants. And then the output is somewhat concrete. It can also be a learning objective, but we have some kind of concrete output. In some of the structures, you will get a prioritized list of good first steps for a product. In some of the structures, it's people have had a discussion about a certain topic and have shared some takeaways. It can also be that they have provided feedback to each other or trained the empathy muscle. So different types of output exists. And maybe this simplest structure that is used as the foundation for a lot of the other structures is this I've already mentioned a couple of times, which is the 1, 2 for all. This is kind of the Swiss Army knife. We make some kind of invitation, we make some kind of question to the group, and then, as I also said earlier, we just say, so what I want you to do once I'm done explaining is to individually and in silence ponder on blah, blah, blah. In this way, we have distributed participation to everybody. We have asked them to do it individually and in silence, because now we are creating some room for the classic introverts that just need some time to reflect on their own. So this part of the exercise takes 1 minute. Sorry, this part of the exercise where we ask people to do it individually takes 1 minute. Then when they've gotten that 1 minute, they've had some time to take maybe some notes, just sit and think. We ask them to pair up with somebody else, and we do that for 2 minutes. So in these pairs, they can just quickly try to say it out loud, because in this way we get people talking in a small setting where they feel more comfortable. And we also have the other type of people that they need to talk to make up their opinion, make up their mind, and that is greatly helped by doing it in pairs. When we have then done it in pairs, we go to groups of 4. So we ask each pair to find another pair, and then they have, some of you might have guessed it, 4 minutes to talk about what were the outcomes or the takeaways on this invitation. And then we debrief in plenum for 5 minutes. So what stood out, anything that you would like to share with the entire group. In this way, we have engaged and have had everybody active for quite a good collaboration, actually, in less than 15 minutes. This often takes around 15 minutes, including the invitation, and it can be plugged in all kind of pre-existing meetings. When we then have this structure, a lot of structures, liberating structures, is built on top of this. When we then plan a session, we are talking about strings of these structures. So it's an order of these structures. So if we are to set a team goal, then it might be that I start with a structure called impromptu network, and then we do a conversation cafe, and then we do something else. But it's again a sequential step that we go through at the workshop. But it might also be that when I'm planning, if this comes up, it might help us more actually to go into another string, because that will focus on maybe a psychological safety or whatever. Then we prepare these alternative strings instead, and we keep them We do not discard them, even though they're not the primary one. But since we do not print all the steps up front, we can actually in the session pivot and take the other one if we or somebody else think that this is going in another direction than what we thought. And this possibility to easily pivot is actually is quite nice. Using liberating structures as an example, I often do some kind of non-liberating structures intro, just where if we are to do a facilitation of something. And then we also started with best hopes. I would start with best hopes, and if we were physically together, I would use the best hope question. So if I asked you after this session what made this a really good session, I would do that in the 1-2 for all, or keep it individually and in silence and present post-its. But if we go with the 1-2 for all, that's one way of doing it. Then we could do a conversation cafe about a specific topic. For instance, if we are to set a team goal, then the conversation cafe is a structure to help do quite structured discussions where we can make sure that everybody gets an equal amount of airtime. So if we have a hippo or another heavy hitter, we can make sure that everybody has some kind of safety when they talk, and they do not get interrupted. So then we can start to build up a string like this. So if we still go with the team goal, now we have maybe we have discussed this in the group, we have discussed what the team goal could be. Then we could follow up with something called a 15% solution, which is what are we able to do without extra funding, without extra resources, people, hours in the day. And there are some more things to this. And this is yet another one that's built on top of 1-2 for all. Then we could take that as the next one, and then we just slowly build up our string when we prepare. Practically, what I do when I prepare my sessions is I have a deck of cards like this. They exist in different flavors. And for each of the structures, you have, I don't know if I can get the camera to show it, you have all the steps, how we configure it, what do we want from it, how much time does it take in total. And then I put them on my desk, and I capture my line of thought like that, which is actually a quite nice way of doing it. And the conversation cafe, for instance, it's 3 rounds of discussion where we talk about first individual and in silence we reflect. First round is you get 1 minute, no more than 1 minute, to share your views on it, your reflections without any interruptions. Second round is that you can give feedback. You can also say I'll pass. And third round is an open discussion where you as a facilitator can ask them if they want to have a talking stick still, a talking token, or do they believe that they can actually have the discussion without people dominating or hiding. If people opt to not use a talking stick, I as a facilitator always say, so I'll just retain the right of introducing it. If I either see somebody talking all the time or somebody not being able to say anything, and that usually gets people to actually behave and not kill people with endless thought. Just before I close, so some ideas on where you can find more about liberating structures. There is an app called Lisa, Liberating Structures app, that you can download both for iOS and Android, that gives you all the structures in a bit similar format like these cards, which is actually quite nice. Then the Liberators, which is a guy called Barry Overeem and Christian Verweij, which is, they have a Medium page where you can find a lot of pretty awesome reports on how would they facilitate it, how do they string things together if it's for a sprint review or something else. They have quite a lot of pretty nice takes on this. Some of them are by the book, facilitation guides. Some of them are also with their own riffs and their own invitations, which is pretty high quality, to be honest. You can also search for me on YouTube. I have a playlist on YouTube where I talk both about the liberating structures in general, but I also have almost a video where I describe how I would facilitate each of these liberating structures. I'm missing 3 or 4, something like that. And then lastly, and it's not to diss it, but there is also liberatingstructures.com where you can find the official description. Personally, I found this difficult to really understand and figure out how to use it. So I'm using the liberators quite a lot and other things. I'm not a big fan of the website. So that was actually it. And that was a very quick introduction to liberating structures. And it's one of those things, the best way of getting to know them is to try them. And so I would encourage you to show up for some meetups. There are different groups around the world, both from the liberators, but also liberating structures in general.
Thank you very much, Carsten. Thank you for that introduction and lovely presentation style too. I appreciate that. I think there was some of the best hopes here.
Yep.
Like you said, not all of them, but some of them. But let's just open it to questions before I start. That's my fallback, is picking on people individually. But does anybody have questions, comments, reflections? Let's see. Somebody here even used the raised hand function.
Yeah, Jonathan.
To you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Janus. And Carsten, thank you as well. That was a really interesting presentation. I've just been on the Liberating Structures website, and I'm confronted with a grid of 35 liberating structures, and I just wondered if you had sort of any advice or any pointers in terms of is there sort of if you're confronted with this situation, consider these 3, or if you're confronted with this situation, use that one. Type of resource that you're aware of?
Several ways of figuring that exist. So one thing is, again, search for liberating structures and then the situation. That might turn up something, but the liberating structures also in the Lisa app is categorized. You can also see these cards have some icons that describes if it's for analyzing, if it's for sense making. So that I can share my screen, I think. So you can see the iPad here, right, where you have the different, you have these tags. So do we want to strategize? Then then we could use critical uncertainties. Then how do we facilitate that? And then also a why. But a lot of it also comes back to knowing them, right, and knowing, oh, this situation that could actually call for critical uncertainties or panicky or whatever. But that being said, I find that very few situations only calls for one specific. It's also very much what we prefer as individuals when we facilitate, which structures we find that we like more than others.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So the Lisa app is probably the first place to start then.
Yep.
There's an app for that.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else? All right. So I think in best hopes, it's a time that we pick a little bit.
Yes.
Some solid advice on good remote culture building. What say you, Carsten?
So for me, culture can be many things, right? But where I actually think liberating structures is able to help is if we take the 1, 2, 4, just to go back to that, maybe online 1, 2, 4, and then all is too much because that requires people to be at least in 2 breakout rooms. So then maybe 1, 3 all or 1, 2 all would work better. And as soon as we get people to start talking, that's also when we start to have the culture building. And there is also another structure called impromptu networking, where you talk in pairs about a specific topic. And again, getting people to talk, getting people to know each other, that helps build a culture where it's okay to talk and not just sit and nod in team meetings. Yeah.
All right. I think that's, in my book, some solid advice. I know Mark well enough that he'll speak up if he doesn't agree. I think we heard a little bit about how to have better meetings. Meetings is perhaps like culture, 1,000 things. They come in many shapes and forms. I think Carsten got some more action points here as well. You've worked with this for a long time, Carsten. Perhaps some closing reflection from your side. Thank you also, I think, from all of us, all this work you've done in trying to take this also textbook that's pretty hard to digest and turning it into YouTube films and nice little animated cartoons.
Thank you. What I like quite a lot is I'm a computer scientist myself, so I can say this without too much judgment, but some computer scientists are super introverted, and creating a safe space where they can actually voice their opinion in a meeting where there might be a manager or a very extroverted salesperson or something like that. That's where I think liberating structures is actually quite powerful, because it can create this room where it's where we can cater for both those that need time, but also those that need to talk. So it's a super powerful inclusion toolbox as well.
Yes, I think that's a perfect way to finish it. Thank you, Carsten. Thank you for taking the time. I know summer holidays is right around the corner, including also a family visit to Legoland, of course. Thank you. Thanks for getting us activated from the beginning. Thanks for sharing. I'll write this up and